They said the new Stanford MBA deserved my office and expected me to smile as they stripped my title. Instead, I walked out that same day, leaving them stunned when they realized who had actually built the company. Okay, Reddit, I really need to get this off my chest. I'm Luciana, 42, and for what feels like forever, I was the operations director at this tech startup in San Jose, Costa Rica. Not just a director, but the director. I swear, if you asked anyone in that building who actually kept the lights on, who knew where every single process document lived, who could untangle a server meltdown at 3 a.m. with one hand tied behind their back, it would have been me. I was the person everyone relied on, the quiet force behind literally everything. My corner office wasn't just a status symbol, it was the de facto war room, the place where crises were silently diffused before they ever reached the executive floor. People would literally bypass their own managers, their VPs, and come directly to me because they knew I'd fix it. I never sought the spotlight, never craved the big speeches. My pride was in the quiet hum of efficiency, knowing that I was the invisible engine making the whole damn thing run. And man, did we come from humble beginnings. I remember it like yesterday. 4 of us crammed into a tiny rented office space, the paint peeling, the furniture scavenged. Our luxury was a broken coffee machine we all chipped in to fix ourselves, learning basic plumbing just to get our caffeine fix. The air was thick with cheap coffee, ramen noodles, and this electric, raw ambition. We were a family, truly. We'd work until our eyes burned, then crash on beanbags, knowing we were building something special, brick by brick. Fast forward to now, and it's this gleaming, minimalist glass monolith in the heart of San Jose. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek chrome, art installations that cost more than my first car. It was all about appearances, about projecting this image of effortless success. The air changed too. It went from raw ambition to polished, almost sterile corporate buzz. Appearances mattered more than sleep, more than genuine connection, more than the sweat and tears that built the foundation. It felt like we'd traded our soul for a shiny new facade. And at the helm of this transformation was Hector, our CEO. Oh, Hector. He was the quintessential charmer. Always perfectly tailored, hair slicked back just so, a smile that could disarm a hostile investor in seconds. He had this silver tongue, right? All his speeches were full of family, synergy, our shared journey, disruption, innovation. He was a master at painting grand visions, at rallying the troops with eloquent words about our collective future. And for a long time, I bought it. I really did. In the early days, that family felt real. But as we grew, his rhetoric started to feel hollow, performative. I was the one translating his grand visions into actual, tangible operational plans, making sure the promises he made could actually be delivered. He'd clap me on the back, flash that dazzling smile, and say, "Luciana, you're a lifesaver. What would I do without you?" It always felt good in the moment, that brief acknowledgement. But it was always just that, a brief moment. Never any real formal recognition, never any protection from the growing corporate machinations. I was the reliable workhorse, the one who handled the messy realities, the one who made him look good in front of the board and investors, while he got to bask in the glory. My contributions were vital, crucial even, but always, always taken for granted. And that, Reddit, was the normal dynamic. Until it wasn't. Okay, so I wasn't just there for the ride, you know? I was foundational. I practically lived in that office for years. I remember during the launch of our biggest product, the one that put us on the map, I slept on that scratchy utilitarian office couch for 3 weeks straight. My pillow was my hoodie, the blanket was a discarded presentation board, and the soundtrack was the hum of servers and the frantic clicking of keyboards from the dev team pulling all-nighters alongside me. The smell of stale coffee and desperation was practically my perfume. My neck was perpetually stiff, my eyes had permanent dark circles. But man, the adrenaline. The sheer satisfaction of seeing it all come together. Of patching crises that never even reached Hector's pristine ears because I'd already diffused them. A major client's system crashing hours before a critical demo? I was there, pulling strings, coding temporary fixes, calming panicked teams, all before anyone upstairs even knew there was a flicker. A supply chain disaster that threatened to derail a production run. I found a workaround, negotiated new terms, and smoothed everything over, making it look seamless. These weren't just tasks. They were my children, my victories. And the staff? Oh God, I trained half the staff who were now walking around that shiny glass building, high-fiving each other over some new initiative they thought they spearheaded. I taught them our systems, showed them the ropes, mentored them through their first big projects. I saw them grow from nervous interns to confident managers, and there was a deep pride in that. But it was also a quiet, unacknowledged pride. No one ever said, "Thanks for building this team, Luciana." It was always just expected. My loyalty was absolute, my sense of ownership profound. I believed in what we were building, not just the product, but the culture, the operational excellence. I was the silent, tireless engine, and I genuinely thought that counted for something. Funny thing is, I had an early foresight, a gut feeling that perhaps my kind of deep operational value wouldn't always be understood or appreciated by the shiny new corporate beast we were becoming. So, years ago, when we were still small and nimble, and Hector was desperate to land a few crucial initial accounts, I leveraged my network. I brought in 2 massive clients, the kind that injected immediate credibility and revenue. And as part of that deal, a small, separate consulting firm I'd quietly registered, just a formality, I told them, was to receive a small percentage of the revenue from any major accounts I personally landed. Hector, ever the charmer, signed off on it without a second thought, probably thinking it was a minor concession, a way to keep me happy. He likely assumed I'd land 1 or 2, and as the company scaled, that percentage would become negligible. A harmless formality. But for me? Oh, that wasn't a formality. That was my insurance policy. A quiet safety net. A tangible, irrefutable link between my individual efforts and the company's bottom line. It was my way of ensuring that even if my voice got drowned out, my contributions couldn't be entirely erased. I always had this nagging feeling that the bigger we got, the more important it would be to have something in writing, something concrete that tied me directly to their success. And slowly but surely, that feeling started to solidify. The company began to outgrow its roots, shedding its scrappy, innovative skin for a more polished corporate veneer. The conversations shifted from, "How do we fix this bug?" to, "What's our disruptive innovation strategy for Q3?" Buzzwords became currency. Synergy, lean methodologies, market penetration, thought leadership. These phrases started echoing through the glass hallways, replacing the direct problem-solving language I was used to. It felt like we were building a facade, focusing more on external image and abstract concepts than the gritty, hands-on work that actually delivered value. Then came the influx of new hires. Bright, eager faces, fresh out of top-tier business schools, particularly Stanford and MIT. These new MBAs, as they were affectionately called, walked in with an air of immediate authority, their degrees shimmering like badges of honor. They knew all the latest theories, could quote academic papers, and had impressive-sounding presentations, but they had absolutely no idea how our specific systems actually worked, or the years of tribal knowledge that kept everything from imploding. Yet, they commanded instant respect from leadership, while my years of proven, tangible results seemed to become less visible, less celebrated. My practical, operational value, once the bedrock of our success, was slowly being overshadowed by strategic, high-level discussions that often felt detached from reality. I started to feel like an artifact, a relic from a different era, one where actual work mattered more than projected potential. The quiet dread began to creep in. My kind of contribution, the one that built this empire, was no longer what they valued. I was becoming just a cog, easily replaceable on an org chart, or so they thought. The shift from valued asset to relic reached its brutal climax one Monday morning. I remember it vividly. I walked into the office, the usual comforting hum of activity, the familiar scent of brewing coffee. But there was a weird tension in the air, a hushed energy that felt off. Then, a calendar invite flashed on my screen. Urgent all-hands leadership meeting, conference room alpha. No agenda, no context, just urgent. My stomach clenched. It was too sudden, too vague. Hector usually loved grand announcements, but this felt clinical. Conference room Alpha was a beast, all polished dark wood and a massive oval table that could seat 20. Today, it felt like an operating theater. Everyone was there. Hector, of course, standing at the head of the table, flanked by the new head of HR, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes. And next to them, a younger man I didn't recognize, looking unnervingly comfortable in a tailored suit. He had that particular just graduated from an Ivy League MBA program glow about him. Perfectly coiffed hair, a confident smirk, and an aura of knowing exactly how to navigate corporate politics. The room was quiet, almost reverent, as people took their seats. My usual chair, the one at the operational nerve center, felt suddenly distant. Hector cleared his throat, his usual captivating stage presence dialed up to 11. He started with the usual platitudes about our incredible journey, scaling new heights, optimizing for future growth. My heart was pounding, a cold dread seeping into my veins. I knew this speech. It was the preamble to something big, something unsettling. And then he dropped the bomb. His voice smooth as silk, utterly devoid of any genuine emotion when it came to me. As we continue our rapid expansion and prepare for our Series C funding, he began, it's critical that our leadership structure reflects our ambitious strategic vision. To that end, I'm thrilled to announce that Tomas Rodriguez will be joining us as our new Chief Strategy Officer. A ripple of polite applause, Tomas offered a small, self-satisfied nod. Tomas comes to us with an exceptional background from Stanford, bringing invaluable insights into global market strategy and disruptive innovation. More buzzwords, more empty praise. I felt a chill. This guy, this Tomas, was a complete unknown to me. He hadn't been part of any hiring committees I was on, hadn't interviewed with any of my team. He just appeared. And then came the part that hit me like a physical blow. Hector turned slightly, his gaze briefly flicking to me, but not really meeting my eyes. And to ensure we fully leverage Luciana's unparalleled operational expertise, he continued, using my name as if it were a brand, we'll be reframing her role into a senior strategic advisor position. This will allow her to focus on high-level initiatives, collaborating directly with Tomas to guide our strategic execution. My smile, the one I had plastered on my face out of pure reflex, felt like it was cracking. Reframing. That corporate euphemism for demotion. Senior strategic advisor. That's a fancy way of saying, you're out of the loop and you don't have a team anymore. The words echoed, but it was the implications that truly roared in my ears, drowning out the polite murmurs. Tomas, this Stanford MBA who probably thought operational expertise meant knowing how to turn on a projector, was getting my corner office. My office. The one I'd earned with countless sleepless nights, the one where I'd made impossible things happen. He was getting my staff, the team I had personally built and mentored, the people who looked to me for guidance and solutions. He was getting my leadership seat at the table, my voice, my authority. And what was I getting? A smaller cubicle, he added, almost as an afterthought. Closer to the team for optimal collaboration. Closer to the team, I was the team's leader. Now I'd be just a consultant in my own company, watching someone else dismantle everything I'd built, with empty promises of high-level initiatives that felt like a cruel joke. My vision blurred for a second. The blood drained from my face, a cold rush making my hands clammy. Humiliation. It was a searing physical sensation, like a brand on my skin. Disposability. After all these years, all the sacrifices, all the times I'd literally been the only thing standing between this company and utter chaos, I was being cast aside, reduced, erased, and expected to smile through it. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply personal, that for a moment I honestly thought I might vomit right there on the polished mahogany table. My mind was screaming, a torrent of, how dare they? How could they? This wasn't just a professional slight, it was a personal affront to every fiber of my being, every ounce of loyalty I'd poured into this place. Every late night, every crisis averted, every single time Hector had clapped me on the back and said, "You're a lifesaver." All of it. A lie. A convenient, disposable asset. That's all I'd ever been to them. And the worst part, I still had to keep that forced smile on, nodding faintly, pretending I understood, pretending I was okay, pretending I wasn't utterly broken and incandescent with rage. The immediate aftermath of Hector's announcement was a disorienting haze. Polite claps seemed to echo from a distant room, and the hushed murmurs of colleagues sounded like background static. I could feel the weight of awkward, sympathetic glances from the people who'd worked with me for years, but most eyes, especially those of the newer hires and the executive sycophants, had already swiveled towards Tomas, eager to ingratiate themselves with the new power. I just stood there, a brittle, almost painful smile frozen on my face, feeling like a ghost in my own body, watching my entire professional world, the one I'd painstakingly built, dissolve before my eyes. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. Then Tomas, the Stanford prodigy, made his way over. He moved with an almost aggressive confidence, a sort of entitled swagger that screamed, "I earned this and you're just collateral." His expensive suit seemed to ripple with self-importance. He reached for my hand, his grip firm, almost dismissive, a brief, cold squeeze that lasted just a second too long. It felt less like a handshake and more like a territorial claim. His eyes, a shade of corporate blue, didn't really meet mine. They glided over me, assessing, cataloging, already moving on to the next item on his mental checklist. There was no warmth, no genuine human connection, just a transactional gesture. "Luciana," he said, his voice smooth, perfectly modulated, utterly devoid of warmth. It was the tone of someone giving a perfunctory acknowledgement to a minor inconvenience. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard you're great at execution." He paused, a small, patronizing smile playing on his lips, a smirk that felt like a slap. "Don't worry. We'll find a good fit for you under the new structure." That word, under. It hit me like a physical blow, a sharp, cold jab right in the gut. The roaring in my ears, the white-hot humiliation, the deep personal betrayal. It all coalesced, condensed, into that single, utterly dehumanizing word. Under. It wasn't just about my office, or my title, or even my team, the people I'd nurtured and led for years. It was about being diminished, reduced to a subordinate, an afterthought, a subordinate cog to his shiny new machine. It was about being told that my years of grit, my countless nights sleeping on an office couch, the indelible mark of my fingerprints on every single operational process, were less valuable, less important, than his abstract theories and his degree from a fancy university. He saw me as a tool, a resource to be managed, a problem to be neatly filed away, not a leader who had poured her soul into building the very foundations he was now so carelessly trampling. The contempt in his voice, the casual assumption of his superiority, burned hotter than any rage I'd ever felt. In that moment, the forced, brittle smile finally shattered and vanished from my face. My jaw tightened, a muscle clenching almost painfully, my hands instinctively clenching into fists, hidden from view against my sides. The anger, which had been a hot, blinding wave of indignation, suddenly turned cold, crystalline, like a shard of ice piercing through the fog of my hurt. A switch flipped inside me, irrevocably. The ache of betrayal was still there, a deep, pulsating wound, but it was now overlaid with a profound, terrifying clarity. I wasn't just disposable. I was being actively erased, expected to simply accept my fate, to smile, and to dutifully find my place under him, to facilitate his rise while my own legacy was dismantled. But as I looked at Tomas, with his smug smile, his dismissive glance, and his condescending tone, something else entirely ignited within me. A spark of defiant, almost icy resolve. My mind, which had been reeling only moments before, suddenly became razor-sharp, cutting through the emotional noise. The years of quiet observation, of meticulously understanding every single crack and crevice in the company's edifice, flashed through my thoughts. I remembered the skeletons buried deep in the company's closet. Not malicious, perhaps, but certainly vulnerabilities. The shortcuts we'd had to take, the unique, complex workarounds I'd personally implemented that absolutely no one else fully understood. I remembered the critical vendor relationships that were based purely on my personal trust, my reputation, not the company's. And then, most powerfully, I remembered the crucial documents, the insurance policy I'd quietly put in place years ago, the specific legally binding clauses about the revenue share from my personally landed major clients. I could almost see the specific lines of text, the dates, the signatures. My name, not Hector's, not the company's, mine. The decision solidified in my gut, as clear and unyielding as the gleaming cold glass walls of this soulless building. I wasn't staying, not for another minute longer than absolutely necessary. But I wasn't just going to walk away quietly, letting them wipe their hands clean of me, letting them frame this as a smooth transition. Oh no, they had just made the biggest, most colossal mistake of their corporate lives. And I was going to make damn sure they understood, in no uncertain terms, exactly what they had lost. The game had changed, and I was about to show them who the real strategist was, and that the true power wasn't in a title or an office, but in the foundations I had built. That cold clarity, that icy resolve, it didn't just sit there. It became my compass, guiding my every move in the hours and days that followed. I didn't move to the new cubicle. Not a single box was packed. Instead, I retreated to my corner office, the one they thought they'd stripped me of, and I started acting. The office was still mine for a few more days, a temporary reprieve before Tomas officially moved in, and I used every single minute of it. I told my bewildered assistant Mariella that I needed to organize my projects and transition my knowledge, a perfectly reasonable excuse. She gave me a worried look, knowing something was deeply wrong, but she respected my space. My first move, the quiet activation of my insurance policy, started that very afternoon. I carefully crafted a series of emails and made a few discreet calls to my clients. Not the company's clients, but the ones I had personally landed and nurtured for years, the ones who trusted Luciana, not the sleek corporate logo. I framed it as a proactive check-in, a personal touchpoint. Just wanted to touch base on Project X, I'd write, and ensure everything is running smoothly from my end before some upcoming internal transitions. It was subtle, almost innocuous, but the undertone was clear. My involvement, my personal oversight, was crucial. I didn't explicitly say I was leaving, or that I was taking them with me. I just planted the seed, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in their relationship with the company, hinting that the bedrock of our partnership, me, might be shifting. I reminded them of specific, complex issues I'd personally resolved for them, of the late-night calls, the tailored solutions. I wasn't just reminding them of my value to my company. I was reminding them of my value to theirs. I was subtly preparing them for a transition, not the one Hector expected, where Tomas would glide in and seamlessly take over, but a different kind of transition, one where my departure would create a significant vacuum. Then, late that night, after everyone else had left the gleaming glass monolith, the cleaning crew humming faintly in the distance, I dug into the archives. Not just my physical files, but the company's digital records, the ones I, as operations director, had full unrestricted access to. I pulled up every single piece of equity paperwork, every stock option agreement, every incentive plan from the past decade. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a furious, silent dance. And there it was, tucked away in the legalese of a 7-year-old agreement, a clause I'd almost forgotten, granting me a significant chunk of fully vested stock options upon the company hitting a specific revenue target. And guess what? That target? I had personally spearheaded the operational push that helped us hit it just last quarter. The numbers didn't lie. The paper felt warm in my hands, a tangible proof of my worth they'd tried to erase. The realization hit me like a jolt. I was, on paper, one of the largest individual shareholders, certainly outside of Hector, and a few key investors. And they had absolutely no idea. No one, not Hector, not the new HR head, had ever bothered to track that specific clause or its implications for my holdings. They saw me as an employee, a resource, not an owner, not a co-builder. My main obstacle, the one that truly gnawed at me, was my junior staff. My heart ached for them. They were good kids, loyal, full of potential, and they depended on their salaries. This wasn't about hurting them. This plan, This surgical extraction was designed to impact the leadership, the ones who had so carelessly dismissed my contributions, not the innocent people who relied on this company for their livelihoods. My leverage, my knowledge of the operational weaknesses, the deep interdependencies. It was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I wanted them to feel the pain of their decision, to understand the true cost of their arrogance, but I also wanted to minimize collateral damage to the people I genuinely cared about. This wasn't spite, it was a righteous assertion of value. The next morning, I sent Hector a deceptively calm email. Urgent meeting required regarding the strategic transition and immediate operational risks. Please include sympathetic board member's name. I knew the board member, Sophia, had always seen my value, had always pushed for greater operational transparency. She was direct, no nonsense, and respected facts above all else. Hector, probably still basking in the glow of his brilliant strategic move, agreed, probably thinking I was coming to humbly accept my new advisor role. The meeting took place in a smaller, more intimate conference room, almost as if he anticipated a quiet, perhaps emotional, conversation. Hector sat opposite me, Sophia to my right. There was no small talk. I placed a neatly organized folder on the table between us. My hands were steady. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, almost unnervingly so. It held no anger, no trace of the profound humiliation I'd endured just yesterday. It was purely professional, purely factual. Hector, Sophia, I began, my gaze sweeping between them. I understand the company's vision for a new chief strategy officer. However, there are a few critical details regarding this transition and my reframed role that I need to bring to your immediate attention. I opened the folder. First, I slid over the equity paperwork, the clauses highlighted, the numbers clear as day. As you'll see here, my fully vested stock options, activated last quarter, make me a significant shareholder. Hector's eyes widened. A flicker of genuine surprise, then dawning comprehension, crossed his face. Sophia leaned forward, her expression unreadable, but clearly intrigued. Next, I pushed across the copies of the original client contracts, the ones with the insurance policy clause highlighted. These 3 major accounts, representing 35% of our current revenue, have specific terms regarding my direct involvement and a percentage payout to my consulting firm, should my role change to one where I'm no longer actively managing these relationships within the company. I've already had preliminary, very subtle discussions with them about continuity, and I anticipate they will follow my lead. Hector's jaw visibly clenched. The charming smile was gone, replaced by a tight, strained grimace. And then the coup de grace. I presented a detailed, meticulously documented report. It wasn't just a list. It was a blueprint of their operational vulnerabilities. This document outlines every critical operational process, every unique workaround, every key vendor relationship that relies solely on my tribal knowledge and personal connections. It details the precise steps required to maintain continuity, the unwritten rules, the specific points of failure. Without this knowledge, and without my active oversight, I project significant disruptions to our supply chain, customer support infrastructure, and product delivery timelines. Based on my conservative estimates, this could impact up to 60% of our daily operations within the next 3 months, leading to substantial revenue loss and potential client attrition. Finally, I slid across a single sheet of paper, my draft resignation, effective immediately. Given the new structure, I stated, my voice unwavering, I find it impossible to continue contributing effectively in a diminished capacity. I am, therefore, tendering my resignation. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I just laid out the facts, cold and hard. Hector's face was a mask of utter shock, disbelief, and a growing, horrifying realization. Sophia, however, slowly nodded, a flicker of something akin to admiration in her eyes. The silence in the room was deafening, heavy with the weight of my calculated surgical strike. It wasn't a threat. It was a professional dismantling. And they were finally seeing the true cost of taking me for granted. The silence in that room, after I laid out my cards, was deafening. It wasn't just a lull. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, thick with the weight of shattered assumptions and dawning horror. Hector's perfectly coiffed hair seemed to droop, his usually animated face going utterly slack, then a sickly pale. His eyes, usually so keen and calculating, were wide, darting from the equity papers to the client contracts, then to my resignation letter, like a trapped animal. The practiced charm, the smooth CEO persona he wore like a second skin, completely evaporated, leaving behind a raw, panicked man. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, just a faint, choked sound, like he'd suddenly forgotten how to breathe. His throat worked visibly, a frantic bobbing, as if he was trying to swallow a rock. He didn't even try to meet my gaze. He just stared at the table, at the tangible proof of his colossal miscalculation. It was almost pathetic. Sophia, the board member, was different. She sat completely still for a long moment, her gaze fixed on me, not the papers. Her expression was unreadable at first, but then, slowly, a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of understanding, maybe even respect. There was no triumph in her eyes, but a quiet, almost weary recognition. It was the look of someone who finally saw the true scale of a problem they'd suspected was festering beneath the surface. For a split second, I saw a flicker of something akin to, "I told you so," directed at Hector, but it was fleeting. She just absorbed the information, her posture remaining perfectly composed, betraying no shock, only a cold, hard assessment of the facts I had presented. She knew. She had always known my value, but even she hadn't grasped the full extent of my strategic entrenchment. I walked out of that meeting, leaving them in that stunned, heavy silence. My legs felt a little wobbly, but my steps were firm. The adrenaline, which had been pumping through my veins like rocket fuel, keeping me sharp and composed, started to recede almost immediately. As I made my way back to my office, the one I was still occupying for a few more hours, the high began to wear off, replaced by a strange cocktail of exhaustion and a creeping unease. My hands, which had been so steady just moments before, began to tremble faintly. I pressed them against my temples, trying to quell the sudden throb behind my eyes. Once alone, the silence in my office felt different, heavier than the one I'd left behind. It was no longer the silence of strategic execution, but the quiet space where doubt could finally creep in, insidious and cold. Did I go too far? The question echoed in my mind, a chilling whisper. I sat down heavily in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, and stared out at the bustling city of San Jose, suddenly feeling very small, very exposed. Was I too harsh? Too clinical? Could I have found a gentler way, a less disruptive path to assert my worth? A part of me, the part that had always valued harmony and avoided confrontation, whispered, "You just blew up your entire career, Luciana. You burned every single bridge. You could have been the bigger person, endured the slight, and found another job quietly." The weight of my actions, the sheer magnitude of the impact I had just set in motion, pressed down on me, making my chest feel tight. What if this backfired? What if I was the asshole here after all? But then I closed my eyes, and the image of Tomas's smug face, his dismissive handshake, and that single, utterly condescending word, "under," flashed behind my eyelids. The memory was a fresh wound, still raw and stinging. I remembered the years of late nights, the emotional exhaustion, the quiet pride in building something from nothing, only to have it treated as disposable, easily replaced by a shiny new MBA with no real-world experience. I remembered Hector's empty promises, his performative family rhetoric, while he systematically devalued my foundational contributions. It wasn't about spite, I firmly told myself, my voice a fierce whisper in the quiet room. It was about reclaiming my worth, asserting my true value, refusing to be made disposable by people who clearly didn't understand what it took to run a company, only how to present one. They had forced my hand. They had stripped me of my title, my office, my team, and expected me to smile and accept my place under someone else. They left me no choice but to show them, in the most undeniable way possible, the true cost of their arrogance. This wasn't revenge. It was a deeply personal, fiercely professional act of self-preservation. It was the only language they seemed to understand, the language of impact and consequences. The doubt, though still present, began to shrink, replaced by a steely resolve. I knew, with a chilling certainty, the chaos I was leaving behind. I could almost visualize it. Tomas, flailing in my corner office, trying to make sense of the intricate web of operational processes I had personally woven, realizing that his Stanford degree hadn't prepared him for the messy reality of keeping a rapidly scaling tech company from imploding. Hector, scrambling, probably making frantic calls to legal, to investors, trying to mitigate the damage, realizing too late that his lifesaver was now his greatest liability. I knew my departure would create a significant void, a vacuum of knowledge and trust that couldn't be filled by a new title or a glossy presentation. The company would struggle. Operations would falter. Clients would get restless. It wouldn't be immediate, but the cracks would appear, and they would widen. And yes, a part of me felt a pang for the junior staff, the ones I had mentored, the ones who genuinely believed in the company. I hoped they would land on their feet, that the fallout wouldn't crush them. But this wasn't about them. This pain, this calculated disruption, was for the ones at the top, the ones who had prioritized image over substance, buzzwords over bedrock, and who had fundamentally disrespected the very person who had built their empire from the ground up. They wanted to erase my legacy? Fine. But they would first have to contend with the monumental chasm my absence would create, and I was ready to watch them fall into it. The days that followed my resignation were a whirlwind, a blur of intense emotions and even more intense action. The immediate impact was swift and undeniable. Within 48 hours, I received the first email. It was from the head of procurement at Client A, one of the 3 major accounts I had personally landed and nurtured for years. The subject line read, "Regarding our partnership moving forward." My heart hammered against my ribs, a mixture of apprehension and grim satisfaction. I opened it to find a polite but firm notification that, given recent internal changes at my former company and their long-standing trust in my personal oversight, they would be transitioning their business to my new, independent consulting firm. A wave of pure, unadulterated vindication washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. My hands were shaking as I forwarded it to my personal email, a small, triumphant smile playing on my lips. Then came Client B, then Client C, all within the next week. Each email was a fresh balm to the wounds of disrespect, each one a tangible, irrefutable validation of my worth. They weren't just clients. They were silent, powerful endorsements of the fact that I was the backbone, not the company name. My official resignation went through with a speed that spoke volumes. The HR department, under direct orders from a now panicked Hector and a very serious Sophia, processed it faster than any other departure in the company's history. There were no exit interviews, no lingering questions, just a cold, clinical efficiency, as if they wanted to erase my presence as quickly as possible, hoping the gaping hole I left wouldn't be quite so obvious if they just didn't acknowledge it. That finality, though stark, brought an immense sense of relief, like shedding a heavy, ill-fitting cloak I'd worn for far too long. The air in my lungs felt lighter, cleaner, free of the oppressive corporate toxicity. I never stepped foot back in that glass monolith, but word travels fast in San Jose. I heard whispers, hushed rumors that painted a vivid, almost comical, picture of Tomas in my corner office. The very office where I'd put out countless fires, built intricate systems, and fostered deep, trust-based relationships. I could almost visualize him, sitting at my old desk, surrounded by my former team, trying to project an air of authority. But the reality, I knew, was starkly different from the polished image he tried to portray. He had the corner view. Yes, the expansive glass windows overlooking the city, but it was an empty throne. He had no idea where the crucial operational documents were actually stored beyond the surface level. He didn't understand the complex interdependencies of the supply chain. He didn't have the personal rapport with key vendors that allowed us to pull off miracles. The critical relationships, the intricate knowledge, the years of institutional memory that kept the place running like a finely tuned machine. Those weren't on a Stanford syllabus. They were in my head, my contacts, my experience. He had the office, but he had none of the power that truly resided within its walls. He was a shiny, empty shell, presiding over a slowly unraveling empire. And my equity payout? Sophia, the sympathetic board member, proved her worth beyond measure. She intervened swiftly and decisively. I later learned she had gone toe-to-toe with Hector, making it clear that any attempt to dispute my vested stock options or the client revenue share would result in an immediate PR nightmare, a legal quagmire, and a potential investor revolt. She framed it as protecting the company's reputation, preventing them from looking like the kind of predatory startup that screws over its founders. So, thanks to her, my exit was not just protected, but profitable. A significant, solid payout landed in my new business account, a tangible testament to my years of unseen labor and the quiet foresight of my insurance policy. My new beginning feels like breathing clean, mountain air after years in a stuffy, windowless room. I have a solid payout, 3 major clients forming the bedrock of my new consulting firm, and the invigorating experience of starting fresh. But this time, I am the CEO. I am the architect. Every decision, every strategy, every late night is for my vision, my values. There's a profound sense of freedom, of true ownership, that I never fully experienced under Hector's family rhetoric. I'm building a company where people are valued for their tangible contributions, not just their credentials or their ability to parrot buzzwords. It's hard work, sure, but it's my hard work. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel truly, genuinely valued. They thought the power was in the office, the title, the nameplate on the glass door. They thought they could simply strip me of those superficial markers and diminish my worth. But they were wrong. So profoundly, arrogantly wrong. The power was never in those things. The power was in the late nights, the trust I meticulously built, the impossible deals signed because someone believed in me, Luciana, not in a logo or a slick corporate presentation. The power was in the intricate web of operational knowledge I held, the invisible threads that kept their entire edifice from unraveling. In the end, Tomas got the corner view. He got the hollow title. But I got the freedom, the financial security, and the undeniable proof that I'd been the backbone all along, not just a line on an org chart they could erase at will. So, Reddit, after all this, Ida for orchestrating my exit in such a way that it crippled their operations and left them scrambling simply because they disrespected my worth? Or was this the only way to make them truly understand what they lost?